The Accident by Darin Strauss. Half my life ago, I killed a girl. It happened at the end of May 1988. I had just turned 18, and when you drive and new post-adolescence, you drive with friends. We were headed to shoot a few rounds of putt-putt. The breeze did its open window work on the hair just behind my neck and ears. We all had a month of high school left before graduation. I was behind the wheel. Far ahead on the right shoulder, a pair of tiny bicyclists bent over their handlebars. It was a 4-lane highway, and my Oldsmobile was in the left lane going south. I think I futzed with the radio, a song I liked had come on. Then one of the riders did something. I remember just that, a glitch up ahead. After a wobble or two, the bicyclist moved onto the road, maybe 30 feet ahead of me. My tires lapped up the distance that separated us. And then the bicyclist made a crisp turn into the left lane, just 10 feet ahead of my hurrying car. For a second, her dark blonde hair appeared very clearly in my windshield. I remember a kind of mechanical curiosity about why this was happening and what it might mean. The next moment has been, for all my life, a kind of shadowy giant. I'm able, tick by tick, to lay out each second before it. Radio, friends, thoughts of bailing on mini-golf and heading to the beach, distance between car and bicycles closing. Anything could still happen. It's when it all takes bright, solid shape that I can no longer watch. The moment raises a shoulder, lowers its head, turns, and slumps away. Well, then it's too late. My forearm hooks to protect my eyes. My friends shout, and I picture a cartoon of my foot disappearing under the dash, kicking down for the brake, reaching farther than any leg can go. Yet, the hood of my car met Celine Zilke at 45 miles an hour. Her head cracked the windshield. I remember the yellow reflector from her spokes, a useless spark kicking up the glass incline and over the roof. The car made it onto the grassy median. I must have done all the normal driver-ish things, put on the clonking hazards, killed the engine. I must have stepped onto the grass in my carefree t-shirt and shorts. I just have no memory of how I got there. Celine Zilke, the girl I killed, was 16, and I knew her. She went to my school. She was a junior. I can see her playing field hockey in blue gym shorts, settled in beside friends on the concrete benches of the courtyard, scribbling notes in the public speaking class we took. Celine sat by the window. Now I walked to where Celine lay on the road. I didn't know whom I'd hit or even that we'd had a serious collision. I thought in terms of broken arms and getting in trouble with my parents. Then I reached her and noticed the peculiar stillness of her face, which transformed her. I didn't recognize her. Celine's eyes were open, but her gaze seemed to extend only an inch or so. She lay in oblique angles, arm bent up and out, foot snuggling under a knee. "I think maybe she's hurt," my friend Dave said. This might seem like an obvious or even a dense statement when you read it now, but not if you were there. I could feel my breathing rev up, and that's all. A tragedy's first act is crowded with supporting players. Policemen scribbling in pads and making radio calls, witnesses crimping their faces, EMS guys unfolding equipment. I must have managed to ask about Celine's condition, because at some point the cop told me she was unconscious but still alive. I remember talk of cardiac arrest, of a medevac on the way. I had the strangest feeling that everyone was responding appropriately to what must have been an emergency, but I still didn't have a feeling there was anything to freak out about. This was something that was being fixed. Still, I'd been careful not to stand any place where I could see Celine. Police had suspended traffic on both sides of the highway. My friends made cameo appearances as standers, mullers, back rubbers. I thought how strange that in normal life we touched each other so rarely. Traffic, I understood, I'd started to think dreamily, is a kind of stream jammed with fish, a rush of momentum, and we have been yanked onto the side of the brook and forced to dry out in the sun. That's the thing about shock. You can have these clear and selfish insights and still not confront the horrible truth lying alone on the street. The most embarrassing memory of that day was when 2 teenage girls materialized from one of the stopped cars nearby. They were pretty and not from my school. I remember they were both in shorts and white sleeveless undershirts. One of them smelled strongly of suntan oil. "Were you in that crash?" she said, her voice a mix of shyness, concern, nosiness. "Yeah," I said, "I was." And I walked away. I dropped to my knees and covered my head with my hands, fingers between the ears and temples like a man who's just won the US Open. This movieishly emotional reaction, acted out for girls I'd never see again, is one more stomach-churning fact of that afternoon. "Oh," the first girl said, coming over, "I know it wasn't your fault." I see our central nervous system as a kind of vintage switchboard, all thick foam wires and old-fashioned plugs. The circuitry isn't properly equipped. After a surplus of emotional information, the system overloads, the circuits break, the board runs dark. That's what shock is. My father arrived. Someone must have called him, though this was before cell phones. But it was the sight of my dad that day, the clean sadness on his face, that made it finally real somehow. And in his hug, I went out all at once into tears, as I never had before and haven't since, just melting there in the midday heat. All this had happened to me. I had done this. I was his son. I got a call the next day saying that Celine had died in the hospital before her parents, who had been on vacation, got the chance to see her. The police, Celine's biking companion that day, and 5 cars of eyewitnesses all said there was nothing that I could have done. No charges were filed. A police detective named Paul Vitucci later told the newspaper for an unknown reason, the bicycle swerved into the traffic portion of the street and she was immediately struck by the car. There was no way he, meaning me, could have avoided the accident, no way whatsoever. Now I thought, how could that be possible? I saw it all happen, and it was hard to believe there was only one way this could have gone. Maybe I'd been distracted. Maybe I could have swerved away somehow. I remember coming down to breakfast and my parents showing me the article, and I remember thinking, that was it. There was no hiding from this. My parents, after offering the quiet-voiced inevitables, encouraged me not to beat myself up about it. You should go to a movie, they said. And so a friend and I drove to Stand and Deliver. At the multiplex, the weirdness of my having gone out, of not being under house arrest, settled on me like ash. We traveled to another town. I didn't want to be seen trying to enjoy myself. I didn't want people to know I was capable of any emotion but constant remorse. We left before the end. That Tuesday, I heard there was a school-wide memorial assembly. Celine's teachers, friends, and coaches giving tribute to the girl who had been so cruelly taken from us. I hadn't had the guts to be there that day or back to school at all. Before the end of the assembly, a male teacher whom I barely knew and didn't like very much stood from the crowd and walked straight to the microphone. This was a surprise. The teacher hadn't been designated to speak. Along with the sadness, he said, taking the mic from the principal, I know there's a lot of anger there. This teacher wasn't a hippie, but he was given to wearing pullover Baja shirts to social studies class. I laughed behind his back many times. Great emotion is justified in tragic events like these, he said, but we should all take a second to remember that Darin is a student in the North Shore community too. The reports tell us he wasn't at fault, and I'm sure we can agree he's a good person. It was years before I wrote to thank him. This guy who was decent enough to perform a simple kindness of remembering the young man whose well-being it would have been easy at that moment to forget. As I'd waited to decipher the forming pattern of accusations and consequences, I returned to class. This happened about a week after the accident and a few days before the funeral. I was met at the school's front door with a stormy glance from a friend of Celine's named Susie Gorolnik. What high schooler wouldn't glare hard at the driver who killed her best friend? I expected my day would be filled with these black looks, but in the homerooms and corridors, there quickly grew around me a zone of silence and involubility. Except when my friends would emerge would suddenly mount brief, haphazard campaigns of everything's normal, quoting lines from Fletch and slapping my book bag or calling me a dick. My friend Frank assured me that they also, without knowing it, had started in on the high school equivalent of caucusing, push polling, lobbying for votes. Come on, they'd say to anyone still on the fence, the undecideds. Wasn't it kind of suspicious how she just turned into his car? You ever think of that? To her friends, they'd say quietly, we have to be there for Darin too. We have to support him too. Susie Gorolnik at the end of that first day approached my locker. I'm sorry she barely managed to say, support you. She told it straight to my kids. At the time, I was sure it was insincere. She'd been peer pressured into saying that. She definitely wasn't sorry. But now, I don't know. Maybe she meant it. It couldn't have been easy for her to talk to me, the kid who had killed the girl she played field hockey with. I'd been thinking about it so often. The crash became for me a kind of videotape that had been over-rented and overplayed. Colors sanded away, sound wobbly, until those moments when it would burst into vividness in high def. I'd remove a soda from a humming mini-mart fridge and think, as teenagerishly melodramatic as it sounds, Celine Zilke will never feel a can in her grip again. Then there was the soundstage brightness of flashback, the gross anatomy of a bicycle lying useless on the street, Celine's chalk-white face. My father and I went to the funeral alone. We'd fallen into a set of dance steps. When accident stuff happened, Mom would stand off to the side, looking into her soda until someone asked if she wanted to cut in. At the church entrance, I remember taking a breath, grabbing the door handles, and then plunging into the crowd. This was and remains the hardest thing I'd ever done. I was relieved to feel tears on my face. Among the selves jostling inside me was an actor who could manipulate people while the frightened kid in there sweated out this terrible confusion. Tears, some part of me knew, would look good. And they were real. I was afraid someone might stand up and yell at me, here in front of everybody. One old man looked at me like he wanted to kill me. Imagine outliving not only your children, but your grandchildren too. He was frail, with the body, slim hips, short, a big belly, of a schoolgirl 8 months into a mistake. I was fuddled and guilt-ridden, and I hadn't faced Celine's parents yet. And then I did. Some morticional functionary shunted me into the back chamber where they were. It was like a green room for a particular death's celebrities. I tried for some reason not to cry here, as if that was what was expected of me. Her father, a big man, moved toward me with a surprisingly light step. He didn't know what to do with his face. It was soft and jowly, and he wore glasses that gave him a Tom Bosley Happy Days vibe. In the long moment before he found words, and as he took my hand, he settled on an expression, a hard-won glint of, I will be friendlier than you have any right to expect me to be. You're Darin. My voice, my face behaved, or word prevailed upon to behave, as if this were a regular meeting between cordial strangers. Celine's mother joined us. She attempted a smile, but not a single muscle obeyed. Her cheeks were flared a difficult color. She was preparing to do something. First, a clenching of her body, a steeling herself for an odious act. Then she hugged me quickly. Just as quickly, she pulled away. I know it was not your fault. They all tell me it was not your fault. She was speaking as kindly as she could, and so her voice was dim. But I want you to remember something. Whatever you do in your life, you have to do it twice as well. She looked at me with exhausted eyes. Because you were living it for 2 people now. Can you promise me? It didn't feel right. I was going to commit to something I had no control over or even really understood. I nodded. I accepted her request without saying a word, as you would a benediction. Then, I was standing before Celine's open coffin. I don't remember how I got there, who had taken me. I only remember the weight of the whispers, the 400 eyes on me. Celine's eyes were now closed, and she looked almost like herself again. Next, I was hurrying from the coffin, past all the stairs in this neatly unreal spectacle. And finally at the door, past the old grandfatherly guy, his peanut head dropped so he wouldn't have to bear the sight of me. As I approached the exit, my dad kept buzzing in my ear, keep your head up, just keep your head up. I hadn't realized I'd been slouching my head. I felt buoyed by a great respect for my father at that moment, and I wondered if I would ever know the things grown-ups know. I lifted my head. About 2 weeks later, I graduated and left town. College offered a sort of witness protection program. Everyone in my high school knew, no one at Tufts did, and while I was there, they never would. But I did make one important stop in town before I left. To Celine Zilke's parents' house. They had invited me to come by whenever at the funeral, so I thought they expected this visit, even wanted it. I went alone. I actually imagined a cozy welcome. They would smile, maybe touch my cheek, and we'd cry together. I knocked.